Hey, so I just want to invite you guys to take a look at the items on the table and just think to yourselves if you've ever consumed one of these items before. Okay, just based off of a show of hands, how many people have eaten at least one of these things? Okay, good, that's what I thought. So if you have ever eaten one of these foods, then you also have likely eaten a genetically modified food before. So you may be wondering what that actually means, and I did too. So I remember I was walking through the grocery store one day and I came to this section of non-GMO items and I had no idea what that actually meant. And I thought, as an environmental major and an active participant in multiple environmental associations, I should probably find out a little bit more information about them before jumping to conclusions about their safety. So then, like many of you have in other subjects, I'm sure, I dove deep into the depths of controversial articles and news publications about health risks and everything. What I came to realize was that each article I read had very contradictory opinions. And I found that the best way to support people in learning about genetically modified food without having a distracting bias was to explain the historical context for the rising technology. So first, it's important to distinguish between genetically modified food and genetically engineered food. Genetic modification is a process that has been used by farmers for at least 10,000 years and can include things like crossbreeding and selective breeding. Genetic engineering, on the other hand, is a relatively new technology developed in the 1980s when a strain of tobacco was modified to be antibiotic resistant. It consists of an entirely artificial process of inserting desirable genes into a DNA strand of a plant. The key difference is that genetic engineering can only occur in a laboratory setting and would not otherwise occur in nature. And I think because genetic engineering is such a rising technology, it's important to zero in on its history so you can have a more recent and up-to-date information. So let's run through the history. As I said earlier, the first development of genetically engineered foods occurred in 1983. In the years that followed, scientists and food industries were pretty much drowned by a tidal wave of regulations, and the technology at this point was not yet open to commercial farming. And because of this, the Office of Science and Technology, or the OSTP, was appointed to work on specific regulations for commercial output. After some guidelines have been put in place, in 1994 the United States deemed genetically engineered foods safe for market and began selling taste-enhanced tomatoes on a commercial scale. This product was largely actually failed among consumers. So the focus shifted after this point from flavor to practicality, meaning that science began to back drought-resistant, bigger yield, insect repellent sort of engineering over the satisfying, tasty ones. And as a result, the genetic engineering of foods nearly saved the Hawaiian papaya from extinction in 2003 by altering them to resist an invasive species. And there have been many cases that would urge people in the positive mindset about genetically engineered foods, but the topic is still largely up for debate. Which brings us to the current times. So it seems like it's less of an issue of the engineering itself and more of an issue with underregulated large industries. And I know that that's a mouthful, so I'll just give you some examples. The greatest issue reported seems to be genetic drift. An article by the New York Times was released this November talking about the unintended damaging of organic plants by genetic drift due to Monsanto's weed-resistant plants. And according to their article, this incident had damage across 25 different states, impacting their plants. Since roughly 2004, there have been farmers that have experienced this same problem of genetic drift and accidental sharing of DNA between plants. And because of this drift, the future of genetically engineered foods seems to lay largely in the hands of industry and better control of unwieldy pollination. So it's easy to see how genetic engineering can be both helpful for people, like in Hawaii when they sustained papaya growth, and also hurtful, like sharing genes of unaltered plant species. And as history progresses, it seems like there's a trend of multiplying issues and safety concerns with this process. And I guess the main takeaway of this talk is to illustrate the progression of genetic engineering and maybe inspire you guys to do some research of your own on the topic. I would love to hear some of your opinions about where you think this technology is going in the future.